So we haven't, did I send out part part 14 yet?
I think so.
I sent it out before I was gone, right?
There's some other ones.
That's what we're starting today. See. There we go. Okay. Who can figure out what this tshuva means?
I think it means he's in a cab and he leaves before the end of the ride.
Yeah. But why does he leave the cab? Let's say mimonit be'emtza hanesiya. Oh, let me just share the screen. Just give me 1 second. There we go. Okay, let's say mimonit be'emtza hanesiya, to leave the cab in the middle of the trip, ekev pekak batenua, because of traffic on the road.
Walk faster.
Yeah, so you hit a big patch of traffic, and so you decide, let me off over here. Okay, now the thing's on the meter, so you would think that what should be the problem, right? So let's see.
Contracted to pay to a certain location.
Yeah, let's see. Sacharti monit lahagia liya'ad misuyam. So I hired a cab to take me to a specific location, like Paul said. V'nitkanu b'pekak gadol. So we hit a huge traffic jam. Shaharechev nosea tipin ve'ein derech chazara. He says that we're just moving bit by bit, and there's no way back. I guess there's no way. I guess there's nothing. Yeah. Ha'imutar li lahafsik et hanasiya be'emtza me'achar v'hamonem mamshich lif'om v'yatza li cheshbon yakar. Am I allowed to interrupt the trip in the middle because the meter keeps going and it's going to end up costing me a fortune? So this is the question. All right. So this happens, and it can happen all the time, right? So Kasav Maran b'Shulchan Aruch Adam shesachar po lahashkos lo esasode. So Rav Sharaga uses the following portion in Shulchan Aruch to try and answer the question. The Shulchan Aruch writes that if a person hires a worker to irrigate his field, al yidei sheyikach mayim mehanar v'yashke esasode. And the way that the method of irrigation is that, there's no, I assume there's no hoses. And even if they're, so he's going to take buckets of water, schlep them from the river, and pour them out over my field. So that's probably a full day's work, right? And in the middle of the work, lo and behold, there's no water left in the river. It must be a dry season. Im ein darko shel hanor lahafsik, va'afilu im darko lahafsik v'hapol yodea mizeh, hahefsid hu lapoel. So he says, if it's not normal for the river to stop flowing, or even if it is sometimes going to happen, but the worker is aware of that when he agrees to do the job, hahefsid hu lapoel. So the loss is the workers. Ubal habayit lo mishalim lo afilu shegam balabayit yada shahanahar alu lahafsik et meimav. So that's the case that's brought by the Gemara, is that the employer can, I know I hired you for the whole day, but after 2 hours, there's no more water. There's no more work for you to do. You can't help me. So I'm just going to pay you for the 2 hours and I'm not going to pay you for the rest of the day. And I have the right to do that because we both knew that this was a possibility. Aval im hapoel lo yada u balabayis yada. It's only if the worker was unaware that this is a temperamental body of water. And the balabayis, the employer, is aware. Ala balabayis l'shalim l'poil escharo kepoil bato. Then the employer has to pay him for the rest of the day, but only as a poil bato, meaning a reduced fee, whether it's 50% or 2/3 of the remainder of the day. Okay, like we learned yesterday. The cost of harama shelo rak ba'oines shel nahar ela b'chol oines she'ira lepoil bein sheshneim yodim shederach ha'oines lavo o sheshneim einam yodim shederach ha'oines lavo ha'hefsedhu lapoil. And the Ramah writes, just as to generalize the rule, that any kind of mishap that they both know, they have equal disclosure that this mishap could occur, either because they both know it's a possibility or neither of them knows that this is a possibility. In either event, the loss is to the worker, not to the employer in this scenario. Because the employer could always say to the worker, I hired you based on my assumption that you could do this, you could complete this job. And we both knew that there was a possibility that some mishap could occur that would prevent you from completing the job. You knew it, I knew it, and I only hired you with that contingency in mind. And therefore, if you cannot complete the job, I'm only going to pay you up until now. And then I'm not going to pay you for the remainder, or at least I'll pay you only as a poil bottle for the remainder. Now, the hispir hasma, the kevin tahapol bala hotzias hamomun midei balabayis, yado ala tachtona. And the reason why the employee is at the disadvantage is because he's the one who wishes to extract the money. Anyone who's extracting the money has the burden and has the disadvantage. So it would seem that we could apply this to our question at hand. Hanoseya shesachar tamonit, beinim yada sheyesh bekakim bein lo yada, o shahanahag yada o lo yada, hahefsedhu shel hanahag. So when you get into issues of traffic jams and you have a car driver, either, they both had the same level of knowledge, right? Everyone knows that traffic jams can occur, or perhaps they both thought that it's unlikely. But in this case, there's no greater sort of disclosure that the passenger has than the driver. So therefore, the disadvantage is on the driver. On the other hand, however, the cases are not analogous. Why? So who wants to think what he's going to say? Why are the cases dissimilar? Okay.
Is there a final destination as opposed to hourly work? If you get paid, it's proportional to what you do, as opposed to this is take me there. You can't be part of the way there.
Well, it's the same thing with the river. You can do a partial irrigation. You can do a partial
The partial
journey.
irrigation is part of the work done. Taking me part of the way there is not really the job of take me to the airport or take me to.
Well, it's getting me partially there.
Okay, I'm stretching.
No,
Fine,
okay,
fine.
all right.
Choose these ways.
Well, if actually, if one used way, if the driver used Waze and didn't disclose that it was heavy traffic there. I
Yeah,
guess
but the
other guy could've
passenger
used
had
it.
access to Waze.
Yeah. The driver had driven that route before and knew about particular problems, construction, and the passenger didn't.
Passenger had access to that information.
Yeah.
Okay. But that would only create a greater disadvantage to the driver,
Does
right?
it matter whether the passenger paid the driver in advance or was gonna pay when he got there, as far as who
Um,
extract money?
So here it sounds like he's gonna pay him once he gets out of the cab, you know. But there's another difference between the two scenarios.
We're not getting it.
One's a
Um,
full day pay and the other one.
Well, the traffic jam could clear up at any time. And it's not necessarily the same thing with a river. When a river dries up,
Oh, I see.
no matter how long you wait, unless you're gonna have torrential rains, it's not going
Maybe
to.
today.
Yeah, that sounds like, it looks like it's gonna be raining today. But he says, "Avolamaisa zilo doma klal lenar shehitzik et meimav. The nahar shehitzik et meimav kivin she'ein ma la'asot yoter." He says, am I running? I hope I'm running. I don't even remember if I turned on the video for today. Oh, well.
We saw Doug Ross, so something.
No. This is for the recording.
Oh, for the recording.
The nahar shehifsik et meimav, kevin she'ein mala sot yoter v'gamim yichaka hanar lo yitein et meimav. He says, in the case of the river, there's nothing more for the worker to do. There simply is no more water left. And even if he waits hours, it's completely out of his control, and the water's not going to get replenished. Zep seida shel hapoel. So that's the disadvantage clearly on the worker. But when a guy hires a cab, granted, they're now stuck in a traffic jam. But here, they're traveling bit by bit. They're traveling. Okay, I did turn the video on. Thanks, Doug. Okay, thank you. But here they're traveling bit by bit. So they're crawling, but they are getting a little bit closer.
Or you can change the route too, go a different way and
Yeah.
just keep the traffic.
You could pull off the road, go find a side street. He says, "V'zeh doime l'mayin shelo pasku meimav, elamotzi mayim tipin tipin v'hudola umashke, shepashet tzarach l'shalim lo et kol sechara." He says this is more analogous to a situation where a guy is going to the wellspring, and this wellspring usually is plentiful in water, and now it's only spritzing a few drops at a time. So it's going to take longer for him to irrigate the field. But since he's capable of completing the job, you hired him for that job, so you have to let him finish the job.
And if you agree to a flat fee, it's not going to cost the other guy any more money either.
Well, here there is a meter. Remember, there is a meter
Is there a
running.
meter?
Yeah.
That was
That's
part
why he
of.
wants to get out of the
That's
car.
why the guy wants to get out. He wants to get out because he realizes this is going to cost him a fortune. But he had committed to he told the guy, take me to the airport. Yeah, right. ובפרט שכל בר דעת יודע שהפקקים בכבישים הוא מילתא דשכיחה. He says, and even more so, this is such a common occurrence to get caught in a traffic jam, whether there's an accident or there is another reason to get caught is there's construction, or there's a dignitary traveling in a motorcade, which happens quite a lot in Israel, where they close off the street because the prime minister is or a visiting ambassador is coming through, or it's during a war and there's a fear of missiles falling, right? In all of those, we just had a tragic loss yesterday where a couple was killed on the road. So maybe they closed the street. It happens a lot in Eretz Yisrael where there's traffic jams. Okay. Umilta dishchicha v'hanosea bikesh lahafil moneh v'lo kava im hanahak mechir mesuyam. To address Marv's point, he says the passenger said put it on the meter, and he didn't ask for a flat fee. So al kain hahefsid hu shel hanosea, and therefore in this case, it's the passenger's loss, and therefore he doesn't have the right. If he had already committed to the guy that I want you to take me to the airport, and he said, put it on the meter, then he understands the risks. And therefore the passenger, the employer, the guy who's hiring, is at the disadvantage because he knew that this could happen. And let's see if there's anything more.
Even though the driver has to extract the money.
Even though the driver has to extract the money, yeah. V'ra'iti l'misha katav sha'hefsed hu shel bal hamonit. I did see that another posek wrote that the loss is on the cab driver. V'taimu v'nimuko imo shanachnu omdim edaito shel hanoseya shelo yarotza liskor et hamonit lizman sheyesh pekakim. And the reason is logical and sound of that other posek, because we assume that had the passenger known that there was going to be such an amount of traffic, he would not have hired this cab to pay an exorbitant fee. And I'm just skipping, there's a lot of footnotes here. We'll have to come back to it. The alpha p shal yedei zen nigram hefsel lebal hamonit who's hizminoto, v'kivenoto lemakom hapkak. And he says, and even though this is going to cause a financial loss to the cab driver, because I hailed a cab and I told him to drive me to a place where there was going to be get caught into traffic. And now the cab driver is upset because he can't get a new fare. He's stuck in traffic. And it's the passenger who's going to get out. This is just causative damage. So we can't hold the passenger liable for the cab driver's loss now that he's stuck in traffic. So the other way of looking at it is that the loss is on the driver, even though the passenger is the one who hired him to drive on a route that was unbeknownst to anybody, but was going to get stuck, cause the guy to get stuck in traffic. And now he can't drive around the rest of the city to be able to pick up fares and things like that. But that's causative. And there may be a heavenly responsibility, but financially, we can't hold the passenger liable. V'daito eno berura. And so Reb Sharaga's response to that other posek is as follows. He says, that's not clear to me. He says, because why are we looking only at the attitude of the passenger? Just like we know that the passenger would not have wanted to hire a cab if he knew he was going to get caught in a traffic jam. The cab driver has the same attitude. He doesn't want to drive into an area where there's going to be a lot of traffic and he's going to be sitting there and without the opportunity to get any other fares. So don't they have to mutually assume the risk involved? He doesn't want to get caught in a traffic jam and then have the passenger bail on him. He can't pick up any other fares. Why should we reckon more with the thought process of the passenger than with the thought process of the driver? The driver is willing to assume the risk of getting caught in a traffic jam because he's going to be compensated for it. So just because you want to argue that the passenger wasn't planning to hail a cab that would get stuck in traffic, the driver wasn't planning to pick up a passenger who would bail on him as soon as there was traffic. And therefore, Rav Sharaga's opinion is that you don't have a right as a passenger to just, since you hired the guy to be on the meter, you don't have a right to bail on him in the middle of the drive. Ulam, imrotze loredet be'emtza nesia b'makom she'imtza nahag nosim achirim, yachol la'asot kein kevin shelo garim lo bazeh shum hefsei. However, if you want to get off at a place where he could pick up other passengers, so then you're allowed to do that, because through that, you're not causing him any damage. So let's say you say to the driver, you know what? I see we're not moving. I may even miss my flight at this rate. Do me a favor, pull off the freeway at the next exit, and you'll be able to pick up other passengers, right? At that point, let's say he's an Uber driver, or well, an Uber driver would be by the job. So, but let's say he's a taxi driver with a meter, and there are other passengers that he could pick up. That I do have a right to do, because I'm not causing him any damage, because just like I'm a paying passenger, there are plenty of other paying passengers that are out there. Okay. So because you're not causing him any financial loss. Okay. So there's a lot of footnoting over here, I notice. So let's start at least. So let's go back. So the Makor Baruch is commenting on this paragraph that perhaps you could argue that this case is analogous to the case of I hired a worker to irrigate my field by getting water from the river, and the river dries up, so I'm not obligated to pay the worker his full fee because we both knew the risk involved. But then he said, but it's not completely analogous, because in our case, it's not like the cab can't get to the destination. It's just going to take a lot longer. So it's more analogous to a guy who's hired to irrigate the field, and it's dripping, but it's taking a lot longer than normal. So therefore, the loss is on the passenger. And so the Makor Baruch says, B'chein kasav gam harishon l'tzion hagon of Shlomo Amar, Shlita, B'shut Shema Shlomo. So Rav Amar, who was also the Rishon LeZion, said that he agreed with this idea. L'chale came to make such a distinction. Ubir de bedina Shulchan Aruch Hanal Iri shiyorad Geshem v'ha'ones hazeh atzmo bitel et haschirut. He says that in the Shulchan Aruch could also be talking about a case where it started to rain. And this was another reason to stop the worker from irrigating the field, ki ein kvar bameh la'avod, because there's no more need for irrigation once it starts raining. Ma she'ein ken benidon didan ha'onesh shel ha'pekak lo mevatel et ha'efsharut levatzea et ha'avodah. Whereas in our case, the mishap of having a traffic jam does not prevent the job from being done. Rak gorein ha'ata shemachmata tzarich l'shalem yoter. It just creates a slowdown, that because of that slowdown, you have to just pay more. The passenger just wants to stop the ride because he doesn't want to pay that much. So since he had hired the driver to take him to a destination, but now he wants to cancel the job, he's at the disadvantage. And at the end of his tshuva, he added a number of other proofs to obligate the passenger. And we refer you to his words over there. We should probably take a look at least at the Shulchan Aruch, the case of the Shulchan Aruch, to clarify what Rav Amar was talking about. Yeah.
Question. The assumption I'm thinking in my mind is the passenger, when he gets this idea that he has to get out.
Yeah.
Is the amount of shekels on your meat. Is he willing to pay the driver for that amount that he's traveled already and then walk out?
Yeah. Yeah.
He is willing to do that.
Well, he has to.
All or
Yeah, right. So that's one thing is clear. He's got to pay whatever's on the meter.
Okay.
Right. Yeah,
Same
right.
way that the employer would pay the guy with taking the buckets.
Yeah, for
a couple
sure.
hours.
Absolutely.
Okay. It's not all or nothing. Not
Right.
He's paying for the service that he's getting.
Right. So here's the halacha in Shulchan Aruch. Let me share this screen. Here's the halacha in the Shulchan Aruch. And it goes like this. Asocher esapol lahashkot hasadeh mizeh hanahar. Upasa kanahar b'chatzi yom. He says, if you hire a worker to irrigate your field from a specific river, and the river stops flowing in the middle of the day, imein darko lahavsecho afilu shedarko lahav lifsok b'apol yodea derech hanahar, say to the pole vein balabayis no sein lo klum. So it's exactly as Reb Sharaga had quoted it. As long as the worker had full disclosure that sometimes occurs, then it's the worker's loss, and the balabayas doesn't pay him at all. I don't know that you don't pay him at all. Afal pishe gam balabayit yodea derech hanahar. Aval imena pol yodea derech hanahar balabayit yodea notein lo scharo kepoil bottle. But if the worker was totally unaware that this was a possibility that the river would dry up, and the balabayas did know, then you have to pay him at least as a poil bottle. But then the Ramah writes, "V'chein b'chol onas she'ira lepoil bein sheshneim hayodim shederach onas lavo o shneim enim yodim avib say to the pole." General rule is where there's no advantage of disclosure to one party over the other, the loss is on the employee, and it's right. Aval in balabayit yodea v'hapoil ein yodea avib say to the balabayit. But if the employer knows the risks and the employee that does not know the risks, so then the balabayit, the employer, has to pay. Vimhavi makat medina. Let's say there's some kind of national calamity, so that would also change the circumstances. Sometimes the employee has the advantage in a case of where there's a national disaster. Although I'm not sure. Oh, okay. Then the Rama continues. He says a guy rents a house for a year and then dies in the middle of the year. What's the law as far as having to pay the remainder of the rent to fulfill the terms of the contract?
Say it doesn't have.
Or you can't.
Right?
Frustration.
It what?
Death of a party in a contract generally frustrates the contract.
Frustrates. That's an interesting word.
Yeah,
Okay.
frustration of contract is a thing.
Yeah.
What about the credit card? People who hold credit card pass away,
Yeah.
who pays for the bill?
Well,
I think they have insurance. No?
there's a contract, whatever, it gets a little bit more complicated, but normally death cuts the contract off.
Okay. So the Ramah says that he only has to pay for the amount of time that he was living in the apartment. If he was deading in the apartment, that's not a word, but I guess living versus deading, right? If he was dead in the apartment, he doesn't have to pay for the amount of time that he was no longer alive. The balabayas havi kapoel, because the landlord is like an employee. Like, I hired you to let me live in your house, right? And therefore, if it was only under the understanding that the terms of the contract could be extended because I'm live, but if it's like the river drying up, so therefore, vahavile lahasnos, unless there was something explicit in the contract to require the heirs of the tenant to make good on the to be able to collect from the estate. Miu yesh cholkin, but there are those who disagree. In kibel haschar kulo, Ein tzarich lahachzir klum nearly. And therefore, the Ramah says, if the guy paid it for the year in advance, then certainly because there's a machlokes, the landlord does not have to return the money. And let's say the reason why the tenant vacated the premises was because of some calamitous weather condition. Like, let's say I went to I rented an Airbnb. We'll have to do this tomorrow. I rented an Airbnb in Florida, and right before I get on the plane, I hear that there's a hurricane. So then I don't have to pay the Airbnb because it's an act of God. That's not my fault. Okay, now you could argue, well, it's not the landlord's fault either. But anyway, we'll discuss that.